It's a pleasure for me to be here. I'm a social psychologist, and I haven't studied anti-Semitism for a very long. I've talked already with some historians, sociologists, philosophers, and others, and it's really a pleasure to see what an interdisciplinary group of thinkers this is. I want to ground you in some important events because my talk depends on that. So there's October 7th, but then there's October 27th, which is when Israel entered Gaza. Subsequently, in 2024, there were a couple of instances where Iran and Israel exchanged fire, once in April and once in October. And then, of course, more recently, there were the two Iran wars, including this ongoing one. And so I want you to be thinking about these events because I'll show you data focusing on specific timelines. So, as of course we all know and deeply care about, anti-Semitic hate crimes have soared since the very beginning of this war. Just to show you some statistics to make it really concrete, the year preceding the war, Jews, who are about 2% of the US populations, were the targets of 11% of all hate crimes, so already vastly overrepresented. The year following the war, this increased to a staggering 27%. So 27% of all hate crimes recorded by the FBI. The last year for which we have complete data is 2024, and both the FBI and ADL report this year as having had the highest number of hate crimes they've ever recorded toward Jews. Again, just to show you what this looks like visually, that little peak with 2,099 hate crimes, that's 2024, and we still have incomplete data for 2025, so that number over there might increase still. While this was all happening, the US has been rocked by protests. Many primarily in support of Palestine and opposition to Israel, over 12,000 in the 8 months since the war started alone. Of course, more since then. Now, the protests chanted all sorts of things, and many of those American Jews consider anti-Semitic. So, for example, 94% of American Jews consider the chant, Israel does not have the right to exist as anti-Semitic. Same thing from the river to the sea. But it's of course not the case that any chant, any statement of criticism of Israel is anti-Semitic. So for example, American Jews are divided over whether the statement Israel is guilty of violating the human rights of the Palestinian people is anti-Semitic or not. And so this is sort of to motivate. So I'm looking at both hostility toward Jews and toward Israel. And I want to motivate that the connection is there and it's quite real. It's not to say that those two have to go hand in hand, but in reality, they oftentimes do. So I'll just give you a few concrete examples from just the span of a few months. So in April 2025, a man set fire to the residence of Josh Shapiro, who's the governor of Pennsylvania, he's Jewish, while expressing hostility related to the Israel-Hamas war. Josh Shapiro has nothing to do with the Israel-Hamas war. A month later, 2 employees of the Embassy of Israel in DC were killed by a man who shouted "Free Palestine" and declaring, "I did it for Gaza." Again, they were not involved in the war in any kind of way. And then the month later, a man set fire to some peaceful protesters, mostly elderly Jews. This was in Colorado, while shouting "Free Palestine" and saying he wanted to kill all Zionists. So again, so not to say that criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism have to go hand in hand, but in reality, they often do. Okay, so why have hostilities increased? So when I give this talk to a different audience, sometimes they want to be cheeky and I ask them for a show of hands. I won't ask you to do that, but I'll just say that there's a really popular narrative, and it's probably the most popular narrative I've seen, and it is that the hatred we see toward the Jews in Israel has to do with the devastation and staggering loss of life in Gaza brought on by the war. So this view makes a specific prediction, and the prediction is that hostilities toward Jews and Israel should follow widely popularized incidents impacting Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Okay, so it's a very specific view, and what I've done is I've tested it. As my data, I used Google search data. So first, Google is just the search engine of choice for almost all Americans. I bet all of you in this room exclusively or primarily use Google. The other thing is Google is less vulnerable to social desirability biases than other self-report methods. And so people might tell things to Google that they might be reluctant to tell pollsters or surveyors or even their close friends. And so to just motivate this point, there's been a lot of really interesting work looking at racist searches. So for example, someone who goes into Google and types the N-word, let's say N-word jokes. So it turns out that racist searches on Google on a regional basis throughout the US predict how people vote. And so some researchers have calculated that Obama lost about 4% of the popular vote because of his race. And that's contra to what pollsters found. Pollsters said, race did not make a difference because people said to them, we don't care about Obama's race. But if you look at what people search and then you look at how they vote, it turns out it did. Okay, so those are two big features of Google search data. Another one is that those data are logged continuously. So they go as far back as 2002, high quality data beginning in 2011, and they're constantly logged. So I can go back in time and look at the before and after any event I'm interested in. And then finally, these data can give information at a really high temporal granularity, day by day or week by week, which is what I need to test the question I'm interested in here. Okay, so I'll show you how I operationalized hatred. I used 15 years of Google search data, and I needed searches people type into Google that would be face valid and could allow me to compare both Jews and Israel. And I did something a little bit odd, and I used searches like these. So it turns out that enough people go on Google and type, fuck Jews, fuck Israel, I hate Jews, I hate Israel. They just type that into the search bar. It's not the question they're asking, they're expressing a sentiment. And we see this much more commonly with AI. People talk to AI like they talk to their friends. ChatGPT, I'm feeling very sad today. People do that with Google too. Google, I'm feeling sad. It's not a question, it's a statement, but people do that. And it turns out it predicts hatred really well. I did a lot to validate this. I'll just show you one small piece of it. For example, these kind of searches predict FBI hate crimes, FBI logged hate crimes toward Jews very well, depending on what statistical technique I use. Anyway, the correlation is surprisingly high. Again, this is hate crimes, real world event, strongly predicted by the hateful things people type onto Google. Okay, lots of technical details, I can talk about this later. It's not super relevant for right now. And so let me show you the data. So on the left is a plot of hatred toward Jews. On the right is a plot of hatred toward Israel. And this is a composite of many of those hateful searches I showed you. And right now, just to see broadly whether this method tracks whatever we sort of see out there in the world. So this is just sort of a sanity check. So this is hatred toward Israel. This big spike you see, right here, this is October. And so hatred toward Jews, as operationalized by their hateful internet searches, spikes big time on October of 2023. Okay, the data of hatred toward Israel is kind of wild. Remember, this is again Google searches. This is hatred toward Israel. Every major event since 2011, so every major conflict between Israel and Gaza, is accompanied by a massive spike in hatred of Israel. Again, these are, well, the dotted red lines are the events. The spikes in hatred is fuck Israel, I hate Israel, Israel is evil. And you can see the biggest spike is in October of 2023. Okay, so this is just our sanity check. So now let's zoom in. Oh, and then just to put some numbers on it. So if we compare September of 2023 to October of 2023, there's a big increase in hatred toward Jews and a massive increase in hatred toward Israel. So that's just 1 month before compared to the month of the war. Okay, so here's our question. Did hatred increase following incidents impacting Palestinian civilians in Gaza? So here's what I did. So there's this group of authors that compiled a list of the major events at the beginning of the war. So remember, so October 7th, the war starts. October 27th, Israel enters Gaza. November 24th, there was a temporary ceasefire, and then December 1st is when the hostilities resumed. So this is about the 2 first months of the war. So there's this group that compiled the major events that happened at that time that also received the highest amount of media coverage, New York Times, BBC, CNN. And so I took all of these events and I looked that same day plus the day after, what was the increase in hatred toward Jews and toward Israel. And the bottom line finding is that there was none. On average, these events did not follow an increase in hatred. So for example, a rocket or something hits a hospital in Gaza. The New York Times rushes to report it was an Israeli missile. Of course, turns out it wasn't. But the news explodes. Israel is horrible. No accompanying increase in hatred toward Israel at that time. It turns out that there is a massive increase in hatred, but it follows instances. When Israel is attacked. So this is hatred toward Jews. So what I've done now is I've zoomed in to the last few years, and so here I'm starting at the beginning of 2023, and it goes all the way till the end of 2025. And so this big line, so Hamas surprise attack, massive increase in hatred, that very same day. So on October 7th, people are going into Google and typing fuck Israel, fuck Jews, I hate Jews. Here, these are the 2 peaks corresponding to the 2 exchanges in fire with Iran. This is in 2024. And this is the 12-day war with Iran last year. Actually, I haven't plotted this past year, 2026. There is a massive increase, as large as this increase, corresponding to this current war. I just have to update the slides. And then these are the data for Israel, and the pattern here is even more striking. Again, October 7th, it's this peak. These are the 2 exchanges with Iran, and this is the 12-day war. And again, and there is a peak for 2026 that's about here. It's massive. I can show it to you as a table, and again, these are the increases, and so on average, when Israel is attacked, so key military campaigns and escalations against Israel, it's on average accompanied by an increase in hatred toward Jews of 166%, and hatred toward Israel of 534%. Okay, so this seems kind of paradoxical, and it certainly flies in the face of an explanation I think many people think is likely. And so let me give you, like I said, I'm a psychologist, and so let me give you some psychological theory that might explain this. So humans are a coalitional species. We're social, and we have to coordinate, especially during war. And broadly visible events can establish common knowledge. So common knowledge just means that I know something, but I also know that you know it, and you know that I know it. That's necessary for collective action. And so broadly visible events, like the Hamas attack in Israel, can serve this coordination function, meaning they can establish common knowledge in a group, and they can rally the group toward shared goals. And events like an attack on a hated enemy are especially effective in doing this, because the best time to attack an enemy is when the enemy is already under attack. And so one possibility is that the Hamas attack on Israel served this sort of rallying point for people who already hated Jews and Israel. And so the attack was an opportunity. It established common knowledge, and it rallied people who already wanted to collectively act against Israel. And so this view predicts precisely what we found, that hatred toward Jews and Israel should increase following attacks on Israel. This proposal is also compatible with, for example, the timeline of protests in the US and around the world. Many protests started on October 8th and 9th, while Israel was still fighting militants off its territory. This is not to say that everyone who joined anti-Israel or pro-Palestine protests were motivated by hatred toward Israel. I think that there are many people motivated by real concern for Palestinians and the devastation in Gaza. But I think that there's a sort of early contingency of people who were very quick to protests, to join these anti-protests. And I think it's the same people who go online and type hateful things that are not motivated by these humanitarian concerns, but instead view this as an opportunity to attack Israel. Sorry, that's my timer. And so just to summarize, I tried to propose one answer for why hostility toward Jews in Israel increased since the Hamas war. I told you there's a very popular answer out there, and that it's because of the devastation and loss of life brought on by the war. I didn't find evidence for this. I didn't find evidence for this causal narrative. And instead, I offered you one theoretically generative explanation that can connect real-world hatred with what, in my field, are formal psychological models of collective action. And so this is work I did with my colleagues Jordan Moon and Steve Newberg. Jordan and I also wrote a tutorial on how to use Google search data, if that's something you're interested in doing yourselves as well. And thank you very much for your attention.